Alberta's election was on Tuesday night. By the way, we covered that on a 3.5-hour live broadcast, which I thought was pretty fun. I was here at Rebel World headquarters. Sheila and Kian were in Calgary at the Kenney election night event. I thought it was pretty fun. Polls officially closed that night at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, but our decision desk was so good that we officially declared a United Conservative Party majority at 7:50 p.m., making us the first media outlet to do so. That's how good we are. I'm joking around just a little bit. I enjoyed that night. Our viewers seemed to like it. Did you know that for most of the night, we had more people watching our YouTube live stream than were watching the CBC's live stream? What do you think about that? That's a fact. And look at how apoplectic the left was. Look at this guy. He even changed his Twitter name to be mean to me. He said, "So, the United Conservative Party gave Rebel Media space to report live from Jason Kenney's election night party in Calgary. Now that's access. The racists and white supremacists are already in the building." Yet another warning sign going forward. Yeah, mate, I'm Jewish. I think you're going to have to find a new insult for the Rebel besides Nazi. That is, if you guys actually want to win an election. I'm actually worried, though, as a Jew, that the word Nazi is being thrown around so much it's becoming debased. It's losing its meaning. The people just think it means a generic insult, like calling someone a dummy or something. So that if we actually need to use the word Nazi, if there actually is a Nazi, and we won't have a word to mean it, we won't have a tool, because we will have cried wolf so often. But you see the madness of the left. I call it rebel derangement syndrome. It's a version of Trump derangement syndrome or Stephen Harper derangement syndrome. The guy who wrote that is some kook, but it was retweeted with approval by dozens of other mainstream media journalists. And now I know you've never heard of Chris Selly before. He's an incel editorial writer at the National Post. And he wrote this. He said, in response to that tweet I just wrote you, he said, "That is legitimately bananas. No serious Conservative Party should let Rebel in the building." Yeah, it's a free country, mate, with a free press, Section 2B of the Charter of Rights, if you're interested. Free press is actually a conservative value, something the National Post used to care a bit about, used to know a bit about, but I guess they're in full bailout mode now. Look, I think it's a bit of jealousy. Did you know that Kian's video of him accosting Anne McGrath, you know, the communist who was running as an NDP candidate in the riding of Calgary Varsity, this video we're showing right here of him asking her about being a communist, and within 90 seconds she panicked and literally took out her phone and dialed 911, emergency phone call. That video is the #1 most watched YouTube video by any media outlet in Canada covering the Alberta election. More than anything CTV did, more than anything CBC did, that video right there. And then Kian made that billboard truck, you know, the one that went around showing she was a communist with that Soviet anthem. As you know, this pressure on Anne McGrath pushed her to publicly renounce her communism at a community forum. Did you catch that part?
I want to acknowledge also something that's come up about my youth, and I want to assure you that I am not a communist. 4 decades ago, when I was a young student, I was a member, and I deeply regret that. It was a mistake, and I'm very sorry.
An important part of Leninism, of course, is any means necessary. Obviously, you would lie if you had to be a good communist. So I'm sorry, I just don't believe that after being a communist for decades, she suddenly renounces it on the eve of the election. But obviously, Kian's campaign had a real impact if she felt compelled to renounce her past. And look at this. Look at this. This is the election results in Calgary Varsity. Look at that. The UCP candidate beat McGrath by just a few hundred votes. I truly believe Kian and his commie-hunting assault vehicle are to credit for that. I mean, can you explain it otherwise? Just a few hundred votes. I think Kian won it. Which I think might help explain why the media party hates us and is jealous of us, because people, especially in Alberta, watch us and trust us we had 5,000 lawn signs going up saying, "Stop Notley." Sheila's best-selling book of the same name was a huge hit, like her past best-selling books on the same sorts of subjects, and all of the above done without a dime of government bailout money. Yeah, I think I know why our competitors don't like the Rebel. Anyways, that was a long tangent about the election. I think it's out of my system now. Will you forgive me? It's great to have the NDP out of Alberta, but I'd like to go back to the key moment for me, at least on election night. So I was here, I was watching the whole thing, and Kenney gave a long speech, and most of it was predictable. You know, boilerplate conservative stuff. He's been giving speeches for 25 years. Most of it was a repeat of what he said in the campaign, but the crescendo, the apex, the part that got the biggest cheers from the audience was when he said he's finally going to fight back against the foreign-funded anti-oil extremists.
And now, friends, I have a message, another message. A message to those foreign-funded special interests who have been leading a campaign of economic sabotage against this great province. To the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, to the Tides Foundation, to Lead Now, to the David Suzuki Foundation, and to all of the others. Your days of pushing around Albertans with impunity just ended. We Albertans are patient and we're fair-minded, but we've had enough of your campaign of defamation and double standards. So today, with this election, we begin to stand up for ourselves, for our jobs, and for our future. Today, we Albertans begin to fight back. From this day forward, whenever you lie about how we produce energy, we will tell the truth assertively, and we will use every means at our disposal to hold you to account. When multinational companies like HSBC boycott Alberta, we'll boycott them. We will launch a public inquiry into the foreign source of funds behind the campaign to landlock Alberta's energy. And we will ban foreign money from our politics and use every legal tool at our disposal to defend the working women and men of Alberta.
It was a long clip there, but I wanted to show it to you, and here's my point. By that moment, Kenney had won. The votes were cast. So he wasn't campaigning anymore. He wasn't trying to get more people to support him anymore. He didn't have to say that if he didn't mean that. So I think maybe he means it. In past shows, I've emphasized a few things he can do to really mean it. He can bring in new laws, like South Dakota's law against riot boosting. Basically says if you foment a violent protest against oil and gas or anything else, you, the fomenter, the booster, are on the hook, even if you're at Greenpeace headquarters in Amsterdam. If you boosted a riot, they'll prosecute you. I like that law. Most laws that Alberta needs are already on the books, though. I mentioned the Canadian version of the RICO statute in the U.S., Section 467.1 of our criminal code. Criminal organization, it's called. I mean, you could prosecute an environmental group that acts like a Hells Angels gang or a mafia family. That's what the law permits. Those are important laws for a number of reasons, and there are other things too. But the thing about police actions and criminal prosecutions is that properly, appropriately, in our democracy, there's a high hurdle because we believe in free speech, right, and peaceful protest, right? So you don't want to just prosecute people for a crime. If it's a thought crime or a peaceful protest, it has to be a real crime, like violence or a riot, which we have had, but we have laws for that. I think our police and criminal prosecutors have actually made the other mistake. They've become a bit of a joke now. You can pretty much commit any crime in full public view if it's against an oil company and you know the cops in the courts won't touch you. Look at this, just the other day. Contempt charges dropped against 14 protesters blocking BC pipeline project. Crown and Coastal GasLink agree not to proceed, but one person charged with assault. Swap in protesting an oil pipeline for protesting an abortion clinic, and you know they wouldn't have been let go. The prosecutors let them go. And it looks like the energy company let them go. Cowardice, responding to political pressure, I don't know, but it has to end. But I don't think you need the criminal law for most of this work, because most of the work of environmental extremists in Canada is not violent. It's not even trespass. It's actually the opposite. It's gaming the legal system. It's jamming up the system. Only the cannon fodder, you know, the college dopes do the stunts, like actually break into private property. They're the ones who pay the price with a criminal record. But the serious fights from Greenpeace and others like them, they're done in the courts. They're done by registered lobbyists. They're done by the propaganda machines. They're not making crimes. The vandals are just the shock troops to give the public the feeling of risk and chaos to the general population, to create a simulation that opposition to pipelines is widespread and organic and real, whereas it's obviously the opposite. It's foreign funded and highly scripted by professional protesters. So the real response is not to use police or prosecutors or even civil lawsuits. It's to cut off the funds and expose who is behind this activism. And how do you do that? Well, the easiest part, but it's the small part, is to pressure oil companies themselves to stop funding their own enemies in a form of green mail, paying bribes to environmental groups so they won't attack them, but maybe they'll attack their competitors instead. Here, for example, here's an annual fundraising shakedown by the Pembina Institute. They call it the Un-Gala. Now, they're an anti-oil lobby group, of course, and you can see them. They're on the Rockefeller Brothers Fund 10-year war on the oil sands. They were part of the 10-year plan. But look who supports them. Scroll down. This is their website. Enbridge? What are you doing there? If you keep scrolling down, you see Shell. Do you see Shell there? You see Suncor, which I think is actually the largest oil sands producer in Canada now. What are they doing there? Enbridge, their Northern Gateway pipeline was killed by Pembina's former president, Marlo Reynolds. He is the chief of staff to Catherine McKenna, the environment minister. Pembina lobbied to kill it, and Pembina, their former boss, killed it. What are they thinking? Why is Enbridge giving the bad guys money? Why are Shell and Suncor paying money to anti-oil lobbyists? I think Jason Kenney has to say to those companies, pick a side, guys. Can't play both sides. And it's not a big ask. He's just asking those publicly traded oil companies to take the side of their own shareholders, to take their own side. And I'm not proposing that he punish them if they choose to sleep with the enemy. He should just say, well, I'm on the other side, so don't come lobbying, don't come for meetings, because I know you're not on my side, so you stay over there with the NDP. Kenney has to take that approach with CAP, too, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. They have been in appeasement mode for 4 years with Rachel Notley. They have to be shaken out of their stupor. But of course, the big money isn't coming from the oil companies paying green mail. The big money is being funneled from the U.S., from the Rockefeller Brothers, from the Tides Foundation, from the Hewlett Foundation, from foundations, especially in America, but also in Europe too, which, funny enough, don't ever go after Saudi oil or Russian oil or Iranian oil or Nigerian oil. Just ethical oil in Canada. They don't even go after Venezuelan oil these days. So how do you go against them? It's often money laundered through what's called donor-directed giving. It's a form of tax fraud. It's filing false charitable returns when it's not charitable work at all. We know they did this. We know they broke the law because they don't really even hide it. I mean, for example, to launder money through a Canadian charity registered under the Income Tax Act to give a charitable receipt to that billionaire, for example, you have to do two things. To get that charitable status, number one, you cannot be politically partisan. You can't be for the Tories or the Liberals or the NDP. No partisan politics at all, zero. Number two, you can be political, like pro or anti-pipeline, but only if it's less than 10% of your activities. And again, it can't be partisan at all, but only 10%. Well, what a joke. All of these so-called eco-charities, they're all about politics. I bet it's 90%. It's really all they do, fighting pipelines, Pembina, Suzuki Foundation, all the lawsuits against pipelines by those legal action funds, that's all political. I mean, how is this not political and partisan by David Suzuki?
I was galvanized when I heard Mr. McGuinty first say that his plan was to shut down the coal-burning plants. This was a big step off the path that we're on. I remember a few years ago when it seemed like every other day in Toronto was a smog day. So the health impact of shutting down those plants will save Ontario people millions of dollars in the future. And I think that what Mr. McGuinty has done is to show real leadership and begin Ontario onto a path that will encourage more and more renewable energy to come in. And I happen to applaud the future that he's aiming us into.
So that was a Liberal Party ad, as you can see, for Dalton McGuinty a few years back. That was David Suzuki. It's perfectly legal in Canada to endorse whoever you want. It's perfectly illegal for a registered charity to do so. There is a zero tolerance for partisan activity, and he endorsed McGuinty. David Suzuki of the Suzuki Foundation. Now, you might recall a few years back when I ran a little NGO called Ethical Oil, we filed complaints with the CRA against some of these law-breaking charities. And they failed their audits. They're obviously breaking the law. They didn't even hide it because no one ever held them to account. Now, they appealed their audits, which is their right, but they broke the law and it was a done deal. They were going to lose their charitable status. They're tax cheaters. Greenpeace lost their charitable status twice, once under the Liberals, once under the Tories, because they're obviously criminals, not charities. It's not charitable work to break into the Calgary Tower, for example. That's criminal work, not charitable work. Anyways, here's a blast from the past. This is almost 7 years ago now. This is an excerpt from a CBC interview when Evan Solomon worked there. The gentleman on the left is a foreign-funded lobbyist named Rick Smith, who at the time was with a registered charity called Environmental Defense. And on the right is Jamie Ellerton, who was with my little ethical oil group. Here, watch just for a minute and a half of this debate.
So I certainly think that what's been happening over the last few months in terms of environmental charities specifically and crassly smeared by the federal government, by the oil industry, by the oil industry's friends like Jamie beside me, is just an unprecedented attack on the ability of Canadians to participate in the democratic process.
So on the Jamie Ellerton, on the homepage of Ethical Oil website, there's basically a big green rectangle that says Canada Revenue Agency, time to investigate. And when you click on it, it encourages people to basically fill out a form that then goes to the National Revenue Minister, Gail Shea, to report any radical or environmental lobby group masquerading as a charity. And you've targeted Environmental Defense, Rick Smith's group. Do you feel the government's targeting environmental groups fairly? And if so, what's the evidence?
No, I think what you see here, Evan, is the government has taken note, like Ethical Oil has, of the increased political and partisan activity of registered charities in violation of the law. So we've wrote letters to the Canada Revenue Agency calling for Environmental Defense and the David Suzuki Foundation to be investigated. Environmental Defense, I will have you note, it not only does a ton of political activity, also engaged in a partisan campaign singling out Peter Kent in Thornhill, making 50,000 phone calls, campaigning door to door, and running ads. This is all on Environmental's website back in February of 2011. And we think they're in violation of the law. They are slandering the oil industry. They're not working constructively to help deal with some of the environmental challenges that the oil sands faces. To the contrary, they're just saying stop it at all costs. And we think we're encouraged by the measures announced in the budget that the government is going to put $8 million at the Canada Revenue Agency to beef up their compliance efforts to ensure registered charities are in violation of the law. What about this?
So yeah, that was 7 years ago. Stephen Harper hired more auditors at the CRA, nonpartisan auditors, of course, directed by other civil servants, no political involvement, no government involvement, just realizing there's a problem with massive tax cheating and putting more auditors on it. And lo and behold, a bunch of them were about to be banned, like Greenpeace was banned twice. I mean, you heard Jamie. In the case of Environmental Defense, they literally boasted online about making 50,000 election phone calls against the Conservative. Hey, fill your boots, but don't call that charitable work. It's not illegal to campaign against Conservatives, but it is illegal for a Canadian charity that has special tax-exempt status. Sorry, that's just the rule. So a whole whack of these fraudulent charities were about to be decertified. But then one of the lobbyists himself was elected to the PMO. No, not Trudeau, but Trudeau's Rasputin-like figure, Gerald Butts. This guy who ran one of these anti-oil NGOs, the World Wildlife Fund. You can see the World Wildlife Fund logo on the tar sands campaign plan in the top right there. Gerald Butts ran it. I'm talking about this guy.
We think that the oil sands have been expanded too rapidly without a serious plan for environmental remediation in the first place. So that's why we don't think it's up to us to decide whether there should be another route for a pipeline. Because the real alternative is not an alternative route, it's an alternative economy.
So Butts was taking foreign money, laundering it through a charitable tax receipt, and spending it on anti-oil lobbying. And then he got into the PMO, and he hired his buddy, the head of the Pembina Institute. You can see in the bottom right there, also on the tar sands campaign plan, and hired the head of the Sierra Club. You can see them in the bottom right there, which was a Rockefeller Front group too. They all went to work for Justin Trudeau. And they killed the pipelines like they said they would. But they also stopped the audits. Look at this. Political activity audits of charities suspended by the Liberals 2 years ago. So there were all these tax cheaters in there, not my opinion, the opinion of the CRA auditors. They were being audited by the auditors, not by politicians. Same auditors who audit your taxes were auditing their taxes. And they were found to be breaking the law, tax cheaters. But they had friends in high places now. Gerald Butts. So the audits were not rescinded. They were legit audits. They had already been appealed and they had failed their appeals. So they were just, what's the word they use? Suspended. That must be nice, eh? It's just like things are always done by Gerald Butts in this crooked PMO. Favors. Favors for friends. Secret favors. Favors for Bombardier. Favors for SNC-Lavalin. And unlike Jody Wilson-Raybould, who stopped the corruption when it came to SNC-Lavalin, the revenue minister obviously had no compunction about the Prime Minister's office coming in to rescue his political and personal friends and his former employer from their tax cheat problems. Must be nice, eh? Must be nice, those crooks. Trudeau and Butts and the no-name CRA minister at the time just let their friends out of tax trouble. And the CBC cheered, of course, because their remaining talent after Jean Ghomeshi was thrown out the window, David Suzuki, their last recognizable talent, well, he was in jeopardy too, wasn't he? They never disclosed that conflict of interest in their reporting on this stuff, though, eh? So what can you do? Well, you heard Jason Kenney.
To the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, to the Tides Foundation, to Lead Now, to the David Suzuki Foundation, and to all of the others, your days of pushing around Albertans with impunity just ended.
All right, well, let's see it. I should tell you, Jason Kenney was in Stephen Harper's cabinet back in 2012, and he knows all about this stuff. In fact, Jamie Ellerton, who was on TV there with Ethical Oil, he used to work for Jason Kenney. Kenny knows all this stuff. Harper didn't do too much about it back then. He hired more auditors, but it moved so slowly. By the time they were about to decertify the tax cheaters, a corrupt man himself was elected prime minister, and he let all his friends off the hook, Lavalin style. So what can Jason Kenney do now? Well, the CRA is a federal organization, but was there fraud on provincial taxes filings with these groups? I don't know. Was there a crime like money laundering that can be investigated by Alberta agencies, by Alberta police, prosecuted by Alberta's Attorney General? I don't know. But I do know that if there were a proper investigation by police, with subpoenas, with search warrants, perhaps with court orders, compelling production of financial documents, where appropriate, follow the law, no witch hunt, follow the law. But if you had such an investigation, you'd get a lot of information. I don't know enough about the powers that a provincial government has in this regard, but I suspect they're there. In the United States, individual states, well, their attorneys general can do investigations and prosecutions all the time. States don't wait for the feds, especially when the feds are of a different political party. So I say, we're about to see what Kenney will do. He says he means it. He said it on election night after he won. The appetite amongst his citizens is there. Someone has to do something. All of these tax cheats skated because Justin Trudeau and Gerald Butts left their crooked friends off the hook. Well, let's see what Kenney does, and his incoming energy minister and his incoming attorney general. If they're creative, I think they can fill in a lot of the gaps left by Harper 7 years ago and by Trudeau and Butts now. Go after the foreign-funded lobbyists. Go after them in the court of public opinion, yes, but go after them in the court of law, too. Hit them where it hurts most, their pocketbook. All they care about is money. Make their secret U.S. donors scared that they'll be outed and revealed. Who knows? Maybe it's not just U.S. donors. Maybe some OPEC countries are financing anti-oil sands activists. It would make sense, wouldn't it? Put the lobbyists on the back foot for once. Smoke them out. Jason Kenney now has the almost unlimited resources of the provincial government to do it. Tell you what, shut down Notley's absurd solar power and wind power schemes. You got $1 billion or $2 billion kicking around just from that. Put 10% of that into hunting the hunters. Those lobbyists will be too busy protecting themselves and hiding their foreign paymasters to have time to organize anti-pipeline protests, don't you think? That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a video monologue and then I interview an interesting guest and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.